happy birthday to us. If you don't already know, Laviot started a year ago through a random meeting of two strangers at a party, and has grown into an incredible organisation. Laviot run 2 to 3 events each month for LGBT plus Jewish women and non-binary people, as well as often welcoming allies like today. We have nearly 200 members as far-reaching as America, Israel, Australia, and even Manchester. And we have a thriving online community as well as our in-person events. Today's panel is all about the concept of mechitzah, and if it is relevant in today's society, especially for LGBT plus people. I'll let our incredible panelists introduce themselves, but I thought I would give you a little bit of background about mechitzot before we start. A mechitzah is a physical separation used in many synagogues to separate people based on gender, usually with women sitting behind the men or in a balcony, with no space for anyone who doesn't fit into those two categories. The Rambam said, it has a great value that they created a space for men and a space for the women. The place of the women above the men's space so the men would not look at the women. Rav Moses Feinstein said, in shuls that have both men and women, it is better that there is a balcony for the women. And if for some reason it's difficult to build a balcony, there needs to be a real divider between the men and the women so they do not fall into having halut rosh, lightheadedness. According to Wikipedia, during the mid-20th century, there were a substantial number of synagogues which considered themselves Orthodox, but did not have a mechitzah. However, the Orthodox Union, the main body of modern Orthodox synagogues in the United States, adopted a policy of not accepting synagogues without mechitzot as new members, and strongly encouraged existing synagogues to adopt them. This seems to be a conversation that progressive Jews are having less and less, because I really struggle to find any Masorti reform or liberal responses to mechitzot online. I mostly had to gather information from people I know, and many of you will have more information that I didn't find. Some Masorti shuls still have separate seating, but usually without a mechitzah, and other Masorti communities have mixed seating. In the UK, Reform Judaism originally had separate seating too. West London Synagogue moved to mixed seating during World War II, so everyone could evacuate together, but went back to separate seating after the war, and some services remained with separate seating until the 60s. Nowadays, I don't know of any Reform or Liberal community that has separate seating or a mechitzah, and it feels as little as if the conversation around mechitzot is already over. I suppose I'll have to hand over to Oli for us to find out if it is.
Okay, let's test this one too. Yeah, cool. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves, but before I will introduce myself. So, my name is Oli, along with Gabi. I started Rabbi, and my sort of take on mechitzah, I grew up in Orthodox shul and Orthodox upbringing, and so for me, mechitzah have always been like a feminist issue rather than like an LGBT rights issue, though now they're sort of converging to a similar thing. But to share a formative experience that I had at mechitzah, I will share two very similar ones, and one of them is when I was on B'nai Akiva Shabbaton, so a weekend away with my other Orthodox friends, and the room had not been set up. All the mechitzot was sort of like the sort of panels that separate the room, or at the back of the room, and people had just assumed that that was the women's section, rather than thinking like, oh, should we set up the room with the mechitzah down the middle? So as more and more women got to shul a bit later than the men got to shul, we all sort of crowded into this very small space, which was the storage at the back of the room. Before a couple of guys were like, would you like some more space, or should we move the mechitzah forward a bit? And we were like, that would be really nice, thank you. But no one sort of thought to question it, that was the space that hadn't been allocated to us, it had just not been set up. And so I think a lot of people take it for rote that like, this space is for men, and then if there are women as well, we'll like, put them somewhere. And so we're going to challenge that today. And the other one was a very similar thing, but in Australia. So just to show you that like this is happening everywhere, and it's not a very specific issue for any particular sect or any particular area, but it is widespread. So I'm going to start this way, and we'll just go around, and I'm going to ask Fernandez to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Rabbi Debbie Summers. I'm the community educator for Reform Judaism, which means because I work with all 42 reformed communities on anything to do with education, which is very varied and interesting and exciting. My background was in interfaith work, and I was at West London, which is where Gabi got her low down on the city upstairs. If you look over the doors at West London Synagogue, it says Esher Chayil above the gallery doors, which is sort of a remnant of that history. Women were allowed down in the 60s, so it was bizarre. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jude. I grew up as a Lubavitch, or I grew up in the Lubavitch community. I got married when I was 19 to a Lubavitch rabbi, and was a Davidson of 3 different communities in the Orthodox world. I got divorced 6 years ago, and since then come out. Now I'm still kind of affiliated with a little bit with Lubavitch because I have children who go to Lubavitch, but I can't do anything.
Do you want anything experience with it?
Do you want to?
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Esther. What about me? So I grew up in Hackney, where the community around me was very, very orthodox, with Stanford Heritage down the road basically. I was basically part of a family which created a egalitarian resorty synagogue, which was absolutely brilliant. It's New Stoke Newington. I went to JFS, which was like a little bit of a contrast to that. And I very much work in the Jewish community. At the moment I work for an organisation called Yachad. Yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. What's my Jewish journey? Well, I guess I grew up at West London Synagogue, that's why I converted. I converted because one Pride Shabbat there was a trans rabbi on the bimah, and I was like, well, why would I go anywhere else? I transitioned when I was 15, I'm 26 now, so that's quite a while ago. I was like counting up when I was writing this, and I was like, seriously, is it that long? And yeah, I converted to Judaism when I was 24, so a couple of years ago. I am a member of North London Synagogue, which does do separate seating in some of the services, which is very interesting, but I go to the egalitarian, the mixed services. And yeah, it's interesting being trans and coming from a reform space into a movement that does have a little bit more rigid gender roles and does separate seating, so that's kind of something to navigate coming from a very liberal background into somewhere that's, you know, still growing in that area in some respects.
Before I ask panelists to share their informative experiences of gender segregation, whether in LGBT spaces, Jewish spaces, whatever it is, I meant to say at the beginning, there are post-it notes around, which you may see. If you have questions and you don't necessarily want to have to remember it until the end of the panel, or you don't want to have to say it out loud at the end of the panel, please jot down the questions on the post-its, like Rhiannon is holding one there. They're spread around, and then Rhiannon and some other people would come around periodically throughout the panel and collect them. So just so that you know that that's available. Okay, so we're now going to go backwards, and if you want to, please share any formative experience that you think shapes how you feel about mechitzot in general or gender segregation as it stands outside of Jewish spaces.
Cool, so yeah, so trans person gender segregation is quite a personal issue. And trans people often feel we don't fit into any or many areas where gender segregated spaces are. We find it uncomfortable to feel at home in spaces where bodies matter in such a big way, whether it's just kind of an assumed heavy scrutiny on, you know, what really makes a man or a woman. Questions that I've had when I've been in gender segregated spaces, like, am I intruding? Am I really a man? Am I counted in this minyan? Do I belong here? Am I actively doing something sneaky or covert by praying with the men and existing as trans? So I've been in the services where there's separate seating. I've been to a partnership minyan. I've been in Orthodox synagogues. I've been to various places where there's gender segregated spaces. I've davened in Israel at the Kotel and in various spaces, and there's an exhaustion to constantly worry about what everyone else thinks about you, and this exhaustion can kind of ruin the experience of prayer and community. And I think mechitzah is just a very social construct, like gender is a social construct. like how we do gender has changed throughout cultures, different times, different spaces, and things we take for granted, like people may take mechitzot for granted, but we've also taken pronouns and biology for granted, and these things aren't reality. We construct our own forms of what gender is based on how we're moving through society, and, you know, as Gabi was saying, mechitzot have evolved as, you know, expectations have evolved, as, you know, society has changed and people are reacting to that gendered pressure. And I think trans people in this context are very dangerous and important because we challenge, you know, the notion of binary cisgender. We're challenging gender segregation, and if you have many ways to define gender, you know, that's more rigid than just being a man or a woman, you kind of, this whole thing breaks down, like, so why do we need these gendered spaces if we don't really know what gender is, or it's made up of very complex things? You know, who do we then allow in them? What are they for? Who should be accommodated? I think trans people can really open up this conversation as it raises so many questions. And I think, like, many people talk about trans and mechitzah like it's kind of hypothetical, but trans people do exist in these spaces, and some trans people do want to daven with mechitzot, or in spaces where there aren't mechitzot. And I can only speak about my experiences as a binary trans man. I've had it pretty easy because I pass 100% of the time. Like, when I've gone into Orthodox spaces, no one has batted an eyelid. But, you know, like, there's some privilege in being in passing, and, you know, there's some good response from people who say, like, oh yeah, people who transition socially and physically, like, they should daven on whichever side of the mechitzah they kind of are assumed to be in. But that's not always the case with trans people, like binary trans people, like, who haven't transitioned socially, non-binary people, or there's just people who flat out think we are our birth gender, or halakhically we're our birth gender, and kind of, you know, there's always that kind of fear that someone will see you as something you're not. So when I'm davening, like, I feel like I'd be in contested territory. Like, I'm thinking, like, if I have a right to be in that space. Like, when I'm davening, sometimes in these spaces, like, I've got in the back of my mind, well, I don't have a penis, should I be here? And that's a weird thing to fixate on. But then again, Jude's definition of gender usually comes down to what someone's genitals look like. And yeah, like, I also feel a sense of, like, segregation already from those spaces, because those spaces are full of men, and I feel like my background as a femme, queer, trans guy, I don't feel comfortable in spaces that have loads of men in any way. So I kind of feel that my multiple identities kind of reflect on how uncomfortable I feel davening in a space. So prayer is very communal, and if I feel there's kind of that residual uncomfortableness because of privilege, like, I don't feel I can engage fully and be boosted in that space. And yeah, like, so I think my body is always something that I think about in some way when I'm in these spaces. It's not something I can really hide from, even though I am, like, fully transitioned. It's kind of like me having this subversive body kind of makes me feel powerful and angry. It makes me feel unwanted. Like, how can my existence, like, unsettle this very deep fabric of this spiritual space? And I think in secular society, it kind of exists as a microcosm of secular society. Like, for people who aren't me, or anyone who will see me naked, like, why do they care? But people do really care about this, and are impacted in it. And yeah, it makes me feel, yeah, like frustrated and tired. And I think, just to end, like, there's nowhere that trans people can lie and hide who they are to God, and we shouldn't have to, because, like, truth is such an integral part of the Torah. In Pesachim 133b, it says that Gosh Baruch Hu hates him who would say one thing in his mouth and then another in his heart. And I think these people are forcing trans people to do just this. Like, we're forced to say one thing and lie and hold another reality in our heart. And I think to experience truth in ourselves is the greatest experience of prayer. And so I really feel that we should sit and feel at home in our holy spaces. And interestingly, I was davening at where everyone's buried in Israel, cave of Machpelah. And they, where Leah is buried, or Rachel, one of the two. They have a massive women's section and a really small men's section, and the space hadn't been set up, so all of the guys were like crammed in and onions touching, and we were just like forced right back. And I thought that was really funny, just because I felt really pleased about that. I was like, haha, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't really get anything out of davening in these spaces, and I guess, it kind of feels like I notice the absence of women around me, and it doesn't maximise the decorum of the spaces. That's it. Sorry.
So I actually think I want to start off by saying that mechitzot, they make me really, 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 really deeply uncomfortable. I think, the last time I went into a synagogue and I had to go and sit in a mechitzah, I felt segregated. I felt completely shut away from the conversation. I felt completely like I wasn't able to access this kind of spiritual place, and I wasn't able to access my Judaism. And I think that was a deeply, deeply horrible experience. And I don't even think I was necessarily thinking of it as kind of identifying as a lesbian, as a queer woman in that space. I was thinking of it more in terms of myself as a woman. I'm not able to participate in this service. I can't see behind the cage that I'm in. Only the men in this synagogue are able to kind of stand up and lead. And I absolutely felt, unable to connect to what was going on around me. And I actually felt more distracted by that thought. And I felt like I was completely unable to, connect to my Judaism due to the mechitzah that I was behind. So I think I just wanted to start off and say they make me deeply, deeply uncomfortable, because I do feel like I am being treated differently, like I am, I have less access to my Judaism as men do, who are, a few meters away from me, essentially. And so this kind of goes back to my first experience of a mechitzah, if you like. As I said, grew up very near Stamford Hill, but very much not part of that Orthodox Haredi community at all. And there were no egalitarian synagogues anywhere nearby whatsoever. And so the one extremely holy day of the year, every year on Yom Kippur, my family would go to an Orthodox synagogue in Stamford Hill. And this was truthfully like going into another world, because the Judaism that I had experienced, to do with my family and friends and culture and tradition, was really a stark opposition to that. And so I would go up and sit in the women's gallery with my mum and my sister and some, other people who would sit around, and who we went to the synagogue with, and me and my sister, we'd always try and see my dad and try and wave and try and distract him, but you just couldn't. You couldn't, because there was a net in front of you. There was a little net in front of you. And you couldn't really hear what was going on. There was, you were basically just I'm sure this is an experience that many people have, shared with me. And I felt utterly excluded. And then I went to JFS, Jewish Free School, Orthodox School in North London, an experience I'm sure many others in this room share with me. And it was exactly the same. And we weren't made to pray in that space. Prayer was completely voluntary, but there was a synagogue and it was Orthodox, and women weren't actually given the opportunity to go into the synagogue that much. It was always the boys who were given the time of day to be taught Talmud, to be taught how to daven, to be taught how to lay, to be taught how to pray, and given the access to spirituality essentially. And I think that was really something which made me feel kind of excluded. It was almost like there was this mechitzah, across the whole entire school. It wasn't just in prayer, it was to do with access, I felt. And so, just like Oli, I think I'd always considered the mechitzah in terms of me feeling left out and excluded from my Judaism as a woman. And I think this is actually a really, really interesting conversation to have. Looking at mechitzah through a queer lens, I almost feel like kind of queer identity undermines the whole entire reason for a mechitzah in the first place. I mean, if supposedly, mechitzah is there in order to, ensure that people are not distracted by objects of sexual desire during their prayer, and that they are able to, be, paying the most attention that they can and have the deepest connection that they can to God, to Hashem, then surely, it's just kind of undermining the whole entire original premise that a mechitzah is there for. And I completely agree with you in that, Judaism and the way that we interact with our Judaism and the way that we interact with our traditions and customs specifically is constantly in evolution and is constantly kind of dependent on community to community and group of people to group of people. And I think this is actually a really interesting and relevant conversation that we need to be having, because I think looking at through this queer lens is making us kind of reconsider the original premise of it, of what a mechitzah is there for. Yeah.
Great, and we'll say more on that later, I think.
So I can't necessarily have a formative experience in mechitzah because my whole life I grew up with mechitzah. I think the first time I went to a synagogue space without mechitzah was when I was 35. So I didn't grow up knowing any different, and that's the way we went to shul. I think the first time I really struggled with it was maybe a year ago actually, where I was in the Babich with my kids. I go to the Babich quite often with my kids, and I had to put a skirt on. And for me, I find that much harder than mechitzah actually. The massive gendered space that has to be when you go to a shul with a mechitzah. Now, I don't go to any spaces unless I can go to trousers, so it's slightly different. And I do enjoy going to shuls where, like I think my first experience on Rosh Hashanah, I went to grassroots and I could sit like with everybody and I could go to trousers. And that was amazing. But for me, a mechitzah, I think it really depends on the world you come from, the world I come from. There's no way, it's not going to change. The reality is the mechitzah's there because that's what people believe. And I think you can push boundaries up to a certain point. And I think everything, like with queer as well, I think you can push boundaries up to a certain point. But then I mix in like a really orthodox world, and it's really, really difficult to the point where like my kids' friends are not allowed to come to my house because I look different and I'm different to their parents. And I think they'll say hello to me and they'll talk to me in the street, but then there's a certain boundary which I'm never going to cross. So I think that's a massive issue with the world, with the religious world anyway.
So I grew up very embedded in the Reform world. Never experienced male rabbis, let alone a mechitzah. My earliest memories of rabbis are of women on the Gemara, and I feel incredibly privileged that I'm essentially the first generation that can say that. And probably first generation we were just in the little spot of Radlock where we were because we happened to have one woman after another. I've joked in the past, but it might even be true, that I'm not sure I knew men could be rabbis till I was a teenager. I'm not sure if I thought about it. Sitting in shul, it was just assumed that we would sit together as a family, and I would untie my father's tzitzit. And I know kids do that anyway because they can pass between, but actually, well beyond bat mitzvah. We sat as a family, we sang in the choir as a family. We were just, it never. I must have experienced mechitzot friends, but hiles and things, but I don't really remember them. My first real memory of experiencing segregated seating was I had a boyfriend in Netza who lived in Leeds, and I would schlep up for the weekend, and I must have been about 16 going to one of the Orthodox shuls with him in Leeds, and I was suddenly sitting in this gallery while all the men were down there, and these women were just sitting gossiping. And it was like this gossip gallery, essentially, where we sat and talked about men. Because if you're going to, you create this segregation, it almost enhances the excitement and the titillation and the watching. There was no prayer as I could experience it. There was no prayer in that space for me, and I don't think there was a lot of prayer for even the women that were used to that space. But I can't be sure of that. Fast forward a few years, and the next real moment of mechitzah that I have in my head is slightly different. I went to stay with my girlfriend's family for the weekend, and her mum, I don't think actually knew we were dating at the time, and took us to Sarchi's, which was a sort of Orthodox shul in central London. Okay. And she used to be my mikveh lady, I think. So I'm suddenly sitting in this space where there's a mechitzah down the middle of the room with my girlfriend. And I'm like, I see you guys checking her out. What's going on here? And there's something about this segregation that enhances the need to look across and to be. I was never interested in the other boys at shul growing up. I mean, I must have been interested in the boys at shul growing up or the girls at shul growing up, but it was shul. You focus, you pray. That's what you do in shul. But when you create the separation, maybe it was because I wasn't used to it. But when I wasn't used to it, it made it much more exciting and interesting. And I think that increasingly that sort of side-by-sideness today, so I'm now married to a man, children, he is just very recently became ordained as a very modern Orthodox rabbi. He was ordained in Jerusalem with women, and there was a man who was denied smicha in New York a couple months ago, so Daniel Atwood was ordained with her husband. So it was a pretty left field Orthodox ordination, but I feel really angry in his prayer spaces. I don't feel grateful in my husband's prayer spaces, because essentially what I'm being told in those spaces is that I have no role to play in the life of the pulpit, because that's over on that side where I can't get to. And yet there is this weird cross-fertilisation that goes on along the mechitzah. You know, children pass backwards and forwards, and we stand behind the mechitzah so we can chat and moan about the service. And so there is a sort of fluidity about it, but I find increasingly I just feel very angry in those spaces about my own exclusion and about the ridiculousness of how heteronormative and binary the mechitzah makes the space. It's sort of a slight tangent, but I'm increasingly interested by my daughter and son, who are, my daughter particularly, so she's at a Jewish day school, Office of the Chief Rabbi, it was the one we got into. She comes home with questions that are very heteronormative and binary. And I'm becoming glad that she does, because in having to ask the questions, I at least get to challenge it. And I think in a lot of spaces, she just wouldn't necessarily even ask the question. So I think sometimes these spaces, in the anger they create in me, are helpful, because it enables us to go and challenge it and ask those questions. But it's certainly not a space of prayer for me where so many people are ultimately being excluded.
Great. Yeah, so thank you everyone for those thoughts. Rabbi, I think you touched on something really important there, which is that as there have always been obviously women and obviously men in Jewish spaces and prayer spaces, so it's very easy for that sort of conservative approach to exist because nothing's being challenged. Like the women in spaces where mechitzot operate are often not allowed to be part of the service or not included to the full extent that they can. But now that we're bringing into a new lens, we're bringing in this challenge of the heteronormative aspect of it, and we're bringing in a new dynamic to these shuls where there are openly gay, trans, non-binary people in these spaces. We now have to question whether there is a relevance anymore to this. So we've heard everyone's thoughts about how mechitzot are not good and we don't like them, but mechitzot come in lots of different literal shapes and sizes. So from the old new shul in Prague, which is an actual brick wall with one brick removed. True story. Yeah. As in it's the end of the building, and then they added a bit more of the building and took out a brick. To spaces that a lot of us have frequented, like New York, London, where as John said, like some of the spaces are just separated, but there's no physical divide. There's just a bit of a space in the middle, and everything is very visible to each other. So I think a lot of people, through upbringing or through being comfortable in spaces where you are with people who have the same experiences as you, mechitzot are sometimes do derive benefit. So what I want to ask our panelists now is, we're going to find out in a second. They're doing a training next week, so this can't be part of the training. I don't think the racism is training.
This is not what I'm training. This is a lot of that way the fire can't get in.
It's fine. Okay, well, while we wait to find out, we have to evacuate. Oh, it's stopped, great, okay. So, my question was, so lots of us do choose to retain mechitzot even though we maybe operate in more egalitarian ways or things like that. So my question to you is, do you recognize any benefits to a mechitzah in any, they can be very small or very large, however you understand benefit, and is there a way to derive that same benefit in a non-mechitzah space? Esther, do you want to start? No? No benefits?
No, I don't want to start.
Oh, okay. But anybody wants to start?
I think there is benefit to straight cis men in cases.
Okay.
I think there's a power play that goes on, there's exclusion. I definitely know women who find prayer in those spaces, but as a social structure, I don't think it's benefiting.
I think, especially when trans people are coming out, especially in Jewish spaces, there is a real kick and like a real pleasure out of being in gender segregated spaces with people of your gender, your actual gender. You feel kind of included. You kind of like when you've been denied this for so long, when all you want to do is be one of the men and learn the social cues and feel that acceptance. I feel gendered spaces are very important for that. I guess like as a trans guy, like we still deal with toxic masculinity and making better male spaces. So for trans women, it might be more important. So I think in terms of gendered spaces, possibly mechitzah, that could be an issue. But yeah, like as Debbie was saying, as a Jewish man, I don't think a mechitzah would be where I can feel protected or secure in my davening, as men are privileged in prayer spaces. And I think if a mechitzah exists, it needs to be because women want it to be there. So I don't feel I can get a say in this either.
So when I was thinking about this panel, I was speaking to a couple of friends about their opinions on mechitzot, and one friend who is Orthodox and chooses to pray with a mechitzah said that actually she really values that space, and for the first time I actually kind of I really understood what she was talking about, because she said that she felt like in this space where she was surrounded by women, she actually felt more supported. And she felt like she was kind of able to be more part of a group and more part of something, really. And she also brought up the fact that she didn't feel like she was being watched. And I know when we bring in the LGBT community, this kind of, I don't know, comes into disrepute a little bit. You can kind of question this feeling of being watched or watching a little bit. But for this very good friend, she chooses to pray in a mechitzah because it is kind of this comforting space, and she, it's what she was brought up with, and it's what she knows, and she doesn't feel kind of excluded from the prayer service because that is her kind of Judaism. And that's very much her experience. And my experience was that I really truly do understand the benefits of kind of women-only spaces. Like, there's a huge, like, all of my friends are in, women well circles group, including myself, and I love that space. That space is, like, the best. It's so supportive, and, we pray and we daven, and I really do get a sense of, like, spirituality from that space. However, I think when you kind of when you put, I find it very, very difficult to derive any benefits when, women are, or when I am kind of experiencing this exclusion, I'd say.
So, I think that the way I was brought up is you didn't even ask any questions, and we didn't think there was anything else. It was just part of the way we grew up. Remembering the service, and we would sit behind the mechitzah and do their own thing. And I think for a lot of people, I mean, I've spoke to a lot of people about it in the religious community, and they're not even interested. Nobody has any interest in leading services. They like to sit behind the mechitzah, they like to chat. They're not really, as you said, a lot of people go to shul because it's a good place to chat. Well, it's true. But a lot of them are not going for davening. They go for the social. So in a lot of Muslim Orthodox worlds, the women go to have a nice chat with their friends, and they don't want to be included in the men's service. They're not even interested. There are some that are interested, and they go to partnership minyanim, for instance, which I think, as a next step, are really great. I love going to partnership minyanim because I can go and be how I want, because I accept to take part in services, and also for myself personally, if I went to a space with a mechitzah, although I identify as non-binary, I would never choose to sit in the men's section. It wouldn't feel a safe space for me. I also wouldn't do it because I think all the men there will feel uncomfortable, and I wouldn't want to put everybody else in that position because it makes them feel uncomfortable. So I think for certain people there are benefits in the mechitzah. I don't think for everybody there's benefits in the mechitzah. I think it really depends on the world that you come from and the boundaries you want to push with it.
Thanks. I think that is interesting because I grew up also with mechitzah and participation. Yeah. And then the first time I was able to be part of service was when I was on camp in Australia as a madricha, and we had a women's mincha. And there was one guy who was like, I want to watch, I want to come. And we were like, no, thank you. And he was like, no, but like I'm just one person, it's not a minyan, so it's still okay to be a women's minyan. I was like, didn't really have the language to be like, you will not make it a safe space. And I have never been, since my bar mitzvah, I've never done it in front of a man, lots of people never heard davening in front of people, and it's sort of, as you touched on, John, like, there is an element of safe space, and so like away from the male gaze, and away from the pressure of the privilege of upbringing where you are invited to take part in the service a lot. And so I think in some senses there can be that direct benefit of having a microcosm of that instead of a women's only service. A sort of women's only section where you can maybe sing and get the words wrong, and you'll feel less pressure that someone's listening to you sing the wrong words, or something of that similarity. And I'm glad that you mentioned partnership, because I've also sort of integrated. I've done in a lot of places. I've done still in my parents' shul, in services where there's absolutely no separation, where there's partnership, which is sort of orthodoxy, but with a bit more participation for the women. So we are moving away from this concept of the mechitzah being indicative of the women's role in services, and we're finding places where women can be participative in service to more and more extent, but we still have this sort of separation. But that doesn't help when we have this new understanding of gender identity, because it's not just about women, it's not just about men, it's about people who don't want to label themselves as one of those things at any one point or at all of the time. So my next question is, for the shuls and communities who still retain this mechitzah, this gender segregation in a very binary sense, but want to be more inclusive of gender identity, of non-heteronormative relationships, what advice would you give to those people?
I think I touched on it really briefly before. Each community, each denomination of Judaism is completely different, and will kind of run how they want to be run, dependent on their congregation. And I think so much of it is actually we need to talk to the congregation. We need to know, what people who are LGBT, want. Have as an open conversation for, the community. Like, for example, when New Stoke Newington, the Masorti synagogue, started, the one which I was very involved with, well, my family was with, like, starting up. You know, we tried a few different things. At first, there was a tri-mechitzah, I believe it's called. So there was a space for women, a mixed space in the middle, and a space for men. And we kind of figured out that over the weeks and over the months of services, nobody was sitting in the men only and the women only spaces. And we thought we're going to keep it like that, just in case somebody new comes to the congregation, just in case they feel like they need that space, whatever. And about a year later, everybody decided that they like sitting with their family too much, and that actually for this specific community, so much of it was to do with family, so much of it was to do with being able to be with each other, that there was just no need for it. And that's the thing, it was a community discussion, it was a community vote, it was something which was a constant conversation. It wasn't like, right, here are the rules, this is what we're going to do. There was no step or checklist about it, really.
Yeah, so when I've governed North London synagogue, like, they know I'm trans, and I sit in the guys section, and that's never been an issue. Like, I'm not sure if it would ever be an issue, but they've always made it clear that it's natural, I'm very welcome. I do have solidarity with my queer friends who are uncomfortable praying with a mechitzah, so as part of my solidarity with my queer Jewish friends who can't down in these spaces, I don't always go in these spaces, but like Jude was saying, grassroots Jews, some of my friends, my queer friends, my non-binary friends felt really uplifted by the fact that there was a tri-mechitzah, but again, encourage its use. You don't want to be the only trans, non-binary, queer-looking person in the middle of the tri-mechitzah with no one around you. That's just a bit since that is my only discomfort with the tri-mechitzahs, would people stick out like a sore thumb? I don't know, I've never done in it. But yeah, I guess it's the wider practice of the shul is okay, so there's a mechitzah, but can you work on LGBT inclusion? It's not just a mechitzah issue. Can you put on LGBT events or shiurim? What does your inclusion look like aside from press spaces? What do your communal spaces and programming look like? And I guess at the end of it, it's accept that anyone will sit on any side depending on how they identify, and there shouldn't be challenge or question as to why we're there. If a non-binary person with a beard who identifies as a woman wants to sit on the women's side, they're going to sit there. If a feminine person with a high voice and a skirt wants to sit in the men's section, they will sit there. Because we're not dim, we know exactly what changing rooms we're going into, we know exactly what sports teams we belong in or which toilets we're using, and we've thought about this a lot more than cis people realise. So if we are on a side of a mechitzah, it's because we have thought very deeply about this and taken everything into consideration, and that is where we're going to sit. So I think, just that attitude is people are going to self-identify, that's okay. I think that's,
I guess the only thing I'd say is, despite my anger, I also, in practice, I think it's important to start with people where they are. You can't just... I also think choice is important. I think it's great that there are places people can choose to go, and you can also choose to go to a place where everyone can sit everywhere and everyone is welcome to identify as they want to identify, and having that choice within the Jewish world is wonderful and empowering. I value and support my friends who have started partnership minyanim, and I go when it's supported for them. Again, it's not a place that works for me in terms of davening, but it's wonderful that it's giving them the opportunities. Halachically, I think it's again, it's not giving me the freedom that I would want to have to be fully female and Jewish and lead. But you have to start where people are, and people have a right to choose to do as they're comfortable with.
I just want to say that I suppose when going into, recently I spent some time in one of the Orthodox schools in Manchester, and I've chosen to go wearing trousers. And every time I go into this women's section wearing trousers, I get weird looks from everybody. And I'm nervous to go into the toilets as well. However, nobody said anything to me. And actually, last time I went, the Rebbetzin from the shul came up to me and goes to me, "Oh, we used to dance together when we were kids in the Babich." So I'm like, "Oh yeah, so we did." And she's like, "We're going to shul." So I think also you just have to take the space and see if anybody's going to say anything. Because if you don't take the space, then you're never going to own it. So sometimes you just have to do it. Even though it's hard, just don't do it.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to open up to the floor. So if anyone has post-its, send them around. You can also ask a traditionally asked question. So I was at shul, my parents' shul the other day, where there is a very traditional women's balcony, and then underneath is where all the men sit. And if you're on the front row of the women's, you can see the bimah where the husband sings from, and if you're not, you can't. And my mum sits on the second row, so if you sort of crane, you can see. And my brother and my dad sit at the front, so we can see them. And my sister-in-law and my brother were having a conversation about who was going to go home and like take my niece, and like what was going to happen after shul, and where they're going to go to kids and stuff. And I'm thinking, like, everyone can see that you're having this conversation. And I'm confused. I don't know if you're talking to me because I'm sitting next to her, and I can't quite see where your line of vision is going to, and you're talking to me, and I'm just waving frantically by myself, and you're not really listening to me. So I think that there's this idea that like we're not separate. You know, we're segregating ourselves, but we're not having these conversations, and we're not communicating, and we're not making eye signals and stuff. And every time there's a bar mitzvah, all the women are like leaning over to see who's laning and who's davening and who's throwing sweets and who's corporate sweets and all these things. And it's like, it's obviously the function is not existing in the way that it was set up to be. So why are we still doing this is my question. And I'm going to speak to one more experience before I ask the question, is that I was in shul a few years ago, and I had this big epiphany. So I was sitting, craning, watching the men walk around on Sukkot with their like fertility dance with their lulas up in the air, thinking like, what am I going to do for the next 45 minutes? You know, like we're just watching this thing happen. And yeah, most things, most shoulders are like that. But this particularly, so I'm walking around singing the slowest songs, the slowest ways. And I was thinking, like, okay, well, do you want to go home, have a cup of tea, come back? Which is also easy for me because I live quite close to shore. And I just thought, like, this is outrageously boring, and I'm so not okay with this. And then a couple of years later, I was in the same seat in shul. My girlfriend was sitting next to me. And I was like, this is way more fun. Neither of us has to do that, but we both get to like talk to each other while this is all going on. And I was like, I felt so inspired by how I was undermining the United Synagogue. Like, your system is not oppressing me. In fact, I have the privilege right now. Because I can have that conversation. I mean, we don't have a chance to like talk about who's going home to feed that, but like, we can have this conversation without the whole shul singing. And that's actually a really nice privilege that you have overlooked us, and so we are actually benefiting from this in a way. And so my question to our panelists before we open up to the floor is that Moshe Schreiber, who was a rabbi in the late 18th century, who was actually quite strong, that was sort of, if I'm right, when Reformism was sort of up and coming, and he was quite a strong in opposition to that. And he said, we separate women from men in shuls to make sure that they don't think improper thoughts during the time of prayer. And as we've talked about, it's quite heteronormative. It's also quite not what's happening right now as we do have these conversations, and so lightheadedness probably is still happening, at least in some ways. And also it talks against the practicalities of people need to do stuff, people have to go home, put the lunch on, all this stuff. So how would you respond to Moshe Schreiber in this day and age, from your own discourse, from your own point of view, and what would you say to him? You'd like to start.
And I think there's a fascinating historical element to this, which is that we think of Reform Judaism as being about equality and feminism, and actually that's also a nature element in some senses. When Reform temples started in Germany, and Schreiber presumably was writing against them, I think some of them had mixes, but actually largely they were quite segregated. Regina Jonas, who was the first woman to be ordained in 1935, she herself believed that women rabbis shouldn't be married because in that day and age, if you were a woman and you got married, you stopped working. She believed that women shouldn't wear talitot, that she should have a separate entrance to the bima, to the one the men would take. Right? There was really fascinating segregation stuff going on because that was the context of the time. And I think mechitzah is a big part of that. 200-300 years ago, it probably was really exciting to be in close contact with people of the opposite sex if you were cis and hetero and all that stuff. And unfortunately, we don't have huge records of voices of people who weren't. To hear a woman sing was probably very exciting because you didn't get to sit and chat to women on the bus. That is not the world we live in today. The men who are dabbling separately and the women who are sitting upstairs, those women could be CEOs of enormous companies with hundreds of thousands of men working for them. And yet Judaism is asking them to put that aside when they go to shul and to forget that, I think there is an issue of power. But all this stuff is very historically rooted in how the world was, and we are changing it to reflect how the world is. And we all have the privilege of being able to inhabit spaces where we can start to redefine and to question. Maybe sit in the United Synagogue with your girlfriend, or gay or non-binary. It's great to challenge that power, but there are also just spaces that we can go to where we can be relaxed and be ourselves. And Judaism has always responded to the world that is around it. And that's not just a Reform Judaism thing, and I'm very proud that Reform Judaism continues to do that. Judaism has always done that, has always asked, how do we do this now? And we're just an authentic part today of being able to continue to ask that question and to add our voices to the layers of Talmud and commentary that Judaism has given to us.
I don't know if I have an exact answer to this question, but I found recently when I went to Orthodox shul with my girlfriend, it was one of the most interesting and difficult spaces because we were so hyper-aware that there should be no physical contact at all in any shape or form because everybody's looking at you. And on the other hand, you could spend hours flirting with the person sitting next to you, so mechitzah is an absolute waste of time. So, yeah, I don't really know anything else to say.
So the quote is, so we separate the men from women in short to make sure they don't think improper thoughts. It's touching on the point that you said before, where actually, if the way to really fast forward these improper thoughts is actually to create a bit of imagination, this fantasy of what is on the other side of a mechitzah, right? I mean, I don't know what men think is on the other side. I don't know what women think is on the other side of the mechitzah, but it kind of goes back to me in the cage of the mechitzah, more focused on the mechitzah itself and what was perhaps going on the other side and what I was being excluded from. And I imagine in a heterosexual somebody who's heterosexual, actually having that, you can't look on the other side of the mechitzah. It's kind of, almost a bit tantalising. It's almost a bit naughty, kind of peeking around the side of the mechitzah, or trying to catch an eye of somebody who's, on the other side of it. So I think firstly that's what I wanted to say. I don't know if it actually works. I'm not 100% sure in terms of trying to stifle the proper thoughts. You can try to stifle them, but they're still going to be there. Just because you try to hide women, for example, they're still going to be there. And the second part of this quote was during the time of prayer. Yeah, improper thoughts during the time of prayer. And I think it goes back to the question of what do you want to get out of prayer? What is the purpose of prayer for you? In some communities, the purpose of prayer is in order to be, have this divine attachment to God and feel closer to God and feel more spiritual. But in my experience personally, prayer for me is something more like community-based. It's something that it's almost meditative. It's something which I do to feel part of something. And yes, it is a connection to do with your Judaism and your relationship to something a lot bigger. But I think so much of it for me is being part of this is prayer to be part of Judaism and culture and my community really. Yeah.
I converted with another group, like there are a few gay dudes there, and to be honest, the frummer the men, the more we were attracted. The beardier, the more tefillin they lay. Like, there's just something about it. It's really weird. I don't know what it is about gay guys who convert and then are really into frummer guys. I don't know. Anyway, so tefillin fetish. I don't know. All that leather. So I guess like the bit I want to touch on is like improper thoughts. Like, what are improper thoughts? To me, like, I have loads of anxiety and I think so many thoughts every day. So improper thoughts to me are about thinking about work, worrying about things unrelated to prayer, just thinking about when I'm going to take my cat to the vets, or like, oh, I need to call my mum. To me, those are improper thoughts, because I usually don't like check guys out in short. Like, actually I don't. Like, yeah, laying that aside. So to me, improper thoughts are thoughts that just get in the way of prayer. Like, they're these intrusive thoughts that everyone gets. And, I think there's a big, fear about these sexual thoughts. Like, oh, you shouldn't think about sex. But, everyone thinks about sex sometimes during the day. And it shouldn't be, this big, scary thing. Like, you think that guy's pretty hot, what do I do? I think, shouldn't really be thinking about that. I'll focus on my prayer. Like, that's all. It's just taking you out of that space and just redirecting a little bit. It doesn't have to be this big monstrosity. Because for me, it's just another intrusive thought that's getting in the way of my davening. It's like thinking about, I should really finish that report Monday. Oh, no, wait, need to get back to Amidah. So yeah, if you really are so put off by being surrounded by gorgeous people, then I don't know if anyone can help you. If you're so, consumed with lust when you're praying, that's your own issue, but close your eyes, look away, daven in a private space during the Amidah, go to a corner of the room, try and refocus your thoughts like you focus your thoughts at any other time during prayer. People shouldn't be penalised for existing, and attraction isn't objective. It's not another person's fault that you're thinking about them. Hashem doesn't care if your mind wanders, just pull it back. I think I was talking to you earlier, the most disruptive thing for me when I'm trying to pray is kids running around the Beit Tefillah and making loads of noise, which is probably more objectively distracting than the presence of another gender. So it's kind of where techniques that I've developed to kind of refocus my thoughts if the noise is getting a bit too much for me. I just do that. I'm not saying put your kids behind mechitzah. I'm just, anyway. I've moved seats before away from families just so I can have a private space, and shul hopped around to get experiences with different minyanim. But yeah, I feel like my davening and my experience davening should be under my control, and use what techniques you have to focus your thoughts, and don't be scared about thinking about sex occasionally, because it's not that bad.
Great, thank you. Are there any post-its that have been wandering around, or does anyone want to ask a question?
I like the traditional hand clap.
Yeah, excellent. We love that approach.
So I'm really interested in there's two things that have come up, which mean I'm Sarah. I don't know why I got this. Anyway, the thing about power and the thing about not thinking about sex. Basically, I read this really good book, which was for grad school, and I didn't think it would be so interesting. But there was a whole chapter on it about how erotic the rabbis, the classical rabbis were, and how they eroticized everything, and it was this very intense, sexually charged male environment. And one of the reasons why the women needed to get the women out of the way is because they eroticized Torah. Torah is the object of our desire, and Torah is the object, and all this kind of stuff. And it just made me think even more about, as a queer woman, the rabbis never even talked about me. They don't care. I'm not wasting my seed. I'm straight men, when they literally don't even talk about us. They're just not interested. We are irrelevant to them.
They vaguely mentioned Robin.
They maybe mentioned some Rabbi. Okay.
Awesome.
But yeah, okay. But like, I just think it's like really interesting as queer Jewish women. What is our relationship with that tradition? Maybe for people who grew up in it, it's a familial relationship. But I'm somebody who didn't grow up in it but has studied it widely, and it's just like really interesting to me. Like, how do I associate myself with this tradition which did not care about me whatsoever? I was like basically irrelevant, unless there was like a shortage of women, and then we're getting into like Handmaid's Tale situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just fine.
Okay, so when I came out as gay, I was like, oh my god, what does this mean for my Judaism? Oh my god, help! So I chatted to a rabbi, as you do. He's a pretty brilliant queer rabbi. And this was like the most amazing conversation ever. And like for a really long time, I had decided that Judaism just wasn't for me because my experience had been in JFS, and it doesn't really like the gays at JFS, and doesn't really like the women as well. So oh god, boo-hoo me. Anyway, I had this brilliant conversation with this rabbi, and he told me to go look up some stuff. And it was really, really helpful. And his theory was, bear with me a little bit, his theory was that Jews, who've always been the ones, historically, who have always been like, the pioneers, who have always been kind of going against the grain, who have always been saying that, actually we're going to develop and we're going to change, but at the heart of it all, we're going to keep our Judaism. And we might have to, develop and change according to whatever's going on in history and in the Bible or whatever, but we're always going to kind of, have this uprising and remain strong with our Jewish identity. And so off the back of that then, he kind of mentioned or kind of hinted at that actually if you are a woman, then that's even more relevant because you are so kind of, pushed to the corner by society to an extent. And then if you are also queer, that kind of adds another layer of it. So in that sense, you are almost being like the ultimate Jew by having all these components of your identity, because in fact, you are kind of going against the grain so much and standing up for what you believe in so much that you are essentially super Jew.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, well done. I think it's an interesting point. I think definitely sounds like trying to write myself into an old tradition, but then often you end up writing yourself into quite a negative narrative. And try and throw yourself a bone, but really not catching it. Does anyone else have a question?
I have a couple.
Yeah, right. So I'm not sure what I want to ask, but I know the theme of it.
Okay.
So I'm an art student. I've been really interested in the mechitzah and making a piece of art about it. And I've been researching the mechitzah and Fernandez in Judaism for a while, but I can't find how to represent the mechitzah in art and what I want to represent in it. So I wanted to ask you guys, if you had to create a piece of art about the mechitzah, what would that be? Don't do my homework. I just want to hear your opinion.
Okay. And you might be able to commission it.
I saw an amazing piece of protest art last year in Budapest. And there's an incredible statue of, I'm going to get it wrong now, but I think it's like the angel Gabriel with an eagle on her shoulders. It's meant to represent the oppression of the Hungarian people by Nazi Germany. It's a nationalist Hungarian memorial. And in front of it is a protest memorial that the Jewish community, alongside other minorities, had erected overnight under cover of darkness, consisting of barbed wire wrapped around the posts of the street, and dangling from the barbed wire are tributes about, the Hungarian acts of brutality against the Jewish community, which the Hungarian army participated in. They were not just victims. About, messages of people's families who were perished, real attacks on the state, and it was taken away 3 or 4 times, and eventually the Hungarian government realised they were giving it more coverage by taking it away, and they just left it there. And it is a beautiful sort of radical protest piece that is just, it changes all the time because people add to it, people stick shekels in it as a way of saying the state of Israel is here now. It's a fascinating thing, and I'm sort of, I feel for me it would have to be some kind of protest piece. In my head I've got an image of a piece of net curtain, because that's the mechitzah I see most commonly at my husband's Sephardi shul. Net curtain.
Yes.
That is suspended between us, but the kids obviously open all the time. And maybe like little notes written on it of people's joy in the mechitzah and people's pain in the mechitzah, or maybe it's like little notes that get passed between the mechitzah and communicating those things between you and the person on the other side, or the joy of being able to communicate to the person sat next to you on your side of the mechitzah and subverting it all, maybe writing it all in blood. That's just me and an obsession with Nidda.
Yeah, like, I was just thinking on that theme of like protest, like picket lines and roadblocks. I took part in the Extinction Rebellion protests, and I think like holding a space, as Jude was saying, and like creating that barrier and allowing it to be shut down kind of deconstructs what that space is. So you could hear the birds, you know, people were singing, people were praying together, and so that block created something. So kind of like using this idea of a barrier to kind of open up a space in like political context. I think, yeah, that was just an idea that came to me.
I'm going down the more modern art route. Just have like, I'm imagining a big white empty gallery space, and then just have like a little, you know, placard thing, just saying the modern day mechitzah, and they're just nothing.
Would that be a Fernandez shop?
Yeah. Both of what Debbie and John said triggered an idea in me, and the first goes back to the old mutual thing with the brick wall, with the brick taken out, remember that one? And just like what you said earlier about how the benefit of the mechitzah is mostly derived by cis straight men. Probably also white. And it's just a phrase that comes out. And sort of that window, like that big brick wall with that window of a brick with like everyone else who's not in that category, like trying to see through and like being represented in this one space. And sort of following on from that is, John sort of inspired this idea about what you just said, like a dam where you have a wall and behind that is a space, but the dam can't hold back all the water, and eventually all those people who are held behind that wall, and I'm still really not sure how I feel about mechitzah, but everyone who's stuck behind that wall, eventually that wall is not going to hold, it's going to crack, or the water's going to spill out over, and now it will represent all the people who are not benefited by this physical barrier, the exclusion, the binary, and all these things. And if you end up making any of these, it would be really cool to see. Have you got any other questions? Yes, pass the closest forward in the meantime.
Yeah, I have one actually. So, I grew up doing mechitzah, and then the last few years have chosen not to. And now I sometimes, or quite often, go to spaces with my girlfriend. And we often sit next to each other, we're quite snuggly. If you've been in practice with us, you will have noticed, probably. And I guess I'm wondering if there was this, if the original concept, this idea was that actually you're not sitting next to the person you are in that relationship with. As well as like, you're not looking at all the other people, but actually you can't sit next to your husband or your wife. Yes, there are egalitarian prayer spaces, which mostly I go to now. But, I don't know, I'm interested in the panelists' views about, do you think having that person you're really close to, hugging them and snuggling them during prayer is helpful, beneficial, distracting other people? What are your thoughts?
I was going to ask something that was like incredibly similar.
We'll add them together.
Cool, brilliant. So similarly, I love to enjoy prayer spaces with my girlfriend. But really frequently I'm incredibly self-conscious that our behaviour is something that does impact the people around me. It definitely comes from spaces of like being on camp, RSY, sexes, what do we call it? Antisocial. And so just like got this idea that like being in a relationship or like being intimate with someone in larger spaces is an antisocial behaviour, and that's entirely where I sit and where I'm at. And so when we're in services, I am very conscious of like of that actually services are communal experiences for everyone that's there, and seeing us being intimate, that might, for a number of reasons, might cause an upset. And I'm coming from complete reform, egalitarian, LGBT inclusive, like Debbie said, only ever women on the bimmer, either women or gay men, was like really gay women or gay men was all we had. And just like basically the opposite take. And so I wanted to put, I was going to ask the same question, but from a different place.
Question you drew back in.
Sorry.
Okay, cool. Does anyone want to say
Yeah, no, I thought about this in the shower today, actually, because I thought it might come up. And I know some gay couples who do sit apart, and I think, yeah, it's something that should be agreed, because I guess people are the best judges of their relationship. I guess it also makes a statement, like, we are a couple, therefore we are sitting apart. Like, I've seen that, and I've realised it most specifically when I know people are a couple and I see them sitting apart, kind of, yeah, does it make more of an impact if they're a gay couple? I don't know, I just noticed it, and I think it kind of makes a statement about their relationship, about, like, respecting other people's space in prayer. But yeah, like, I dislike heavily public displays of affection in the synagogue. I think, yeah, it's like chatting to me. I've been at spaces where, like, I'm trying to dub in this, yeah, we done, like, people are talking behind me, and like, I think if I can see something, it just makes it uncomfortable. I think chatting and like really getting intimate, I think that should be left for like spaces where, like other communal spaces that aren't like focused on prayer and people are trying to focus. Like, I'm all for PDA, like I am the most affectionate person with my boyfriend. Like, I've converted him, like he hates touching people, and like now that I'm with him, like he will be touched by me. Like, I will hug him and hold his hand. But yeah, like, I guess time and space, like, and being mindful of people around you. Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with it. Would I sit apart from him in shul? Like, probably not. I guess I would have to formulate my thoughts on what impact it has on my doubling. But yeah, like, holding hands, I guess, is fine. I think when people can see you making out, then that's an issue.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I also think I feel like quite, like even more distracted if I had to sit apart from my partner. Because I'd be like looking over my shoulder and be like, oh, I wonder what she's up to, you know? Or like, oh, I wonder if she's into, you know, like whatever it is. So I think that I would still like to be next to my partner. Yeah. But also, I think it like comes back to the fact that for me, what prayer is like, you know, community and being with my family and being with people and it being very much like a communal experience as opposed to like something which I do by myself and is a very like personal experience. For me, it's like a community thing.
I've never really been in a space where I would touch my partner in short. I've never been in the services where there are queer couples really that are openly affectionate. I think if I did, it would be like a massive outcry, to be honest. So I think it might be difficult. On the other hand, I would feel really weird sitting somewhere else. I think I like sitting together. I think it's like sitting with family. It's really nice to sit with your family when you go to services. The same way I sit with my kids, I would like to sit with my partner in the shul service. But I mostly frequent Orthodox shuls, so I think it would be weird, to be honest, and quite uncomfortable for everybody. So I probably wouldn't do anything. Yeah.
term was for how PDAs are described, I remembered my madrikin on Israel tour, because I went on Israel tour with the boyfriend from Leeds. We were taken aside and told not to feast in front of the hungry. Which I was really amused by at the time, but actually there's something really powerful in that. At rabbinical school, one of the most powerful lessons I had from my now boss, Rabbi Klausner, she came to teach a lesson about baby blessings, but she started the class by talking about the fact that every time you celebrate anything in community, you cause somebody else pain. Now that doesn't mean that we can avoid that pain. We're not going to stop celebrating afrofs and baby blessings and marking birthdays and anniversaries. We're going to celebrate life in community, but we're also holding the fact that that causes people pain at the same time. And actually, it just struck me that I wonder how far PDAs go into that. How far is your own prayer possible? Only you can know. And that isn't anyone else's business, really. If you are able to pray and it's enhanced by PDAs and snuggling, that's great. I think being conscious of what those outward acts do for those around you in prayer, I think, is really a wonderful thing to be cognitive of. And to be aware of community around us. And what I mean, for me, in the spaces that I go into, it wouldn't be that you're sitting snuggling your female partner. It's just, what does snuggling and shawl do to other people that you have a partner that, you know, those sorts of questions. And I think only you can know what your prayer life is enhanced by, but to have that cognizance of what is happening for other people in their prayer lives around you too is a beautiful thing to be aware of.
Great, okay, so I'm going to ask one more question, and in the answer, if everyone could sort of just give like a single take-home kind of message that you want people to get out of this panel, that would be great. The question is, do you have any advice for young queer people entering these spaces or finding their spaces? And just to give a bit of context for the question, this is from someone who works at JFS, which is a service in Orthodox Learning School, and I'm going to add a little bit onto this question, which is that I actively stay in Orthodox spaces or Orthodox affiliated spaces to be that person who is, not by such inspiration, but I think it is important to see, maybe not struggling necessarily, but definitely representation, and I've definitely had a lot of tricky conversations that I really hope other people who are less sure of themselves or less far along in their journeys are not having to have those conversations. So, do you have any advice, and what is it for young queer people entering these spaces? Let's start on this side. And the digital take.
I guess my advice is really to try be as authentically you as possible, because I think it's the only way to be. I think for me, I've been through a massive journey in my life, and the only way I was able to take power, I suppose, was to be authentic. And it's really, really, really hard to stand up there and be different. And in Orthodox spaces, but the only way to do it is to be authentic and take power. So I suppose my take home is the same thing. It would be true to who you are, and don't let other people's looks, questions, because there are always going to be those people who look, who question, who stare, who don't talk to you, who don't let their kids interact with you, or there's always going to be those people, but you just have to stay true and authentic to who you are and ignore those people, because you're allowed to be who you want to be.
I would agree with all of that. I think being authentic due to you is really important, and find spaces that will nurture you to do that. And spaces that you feel you are comfortable and you are safe in. Sometimes that will be pushing the boundaries of the spaces that you want to be in, and sometimes it will be finding the space that's ready for you. But there is a huge diversity of spaces out there, and I hope you find the one that allows you to be the most fully you that you can be.
Yeah, I think I just really echo what you both have said. I think it's about finding the space that you feel comfortable in and not being scared to put yourself out there and actually just go for it and you know, try out a few different spaces. And if one space works for you for a year or so or a little bit of time and it's not working anymore, you can either, you know, choose to change that space or you can, you know, find somewhere else. I think what my main takeaway is actually like just go and do it, because I think so, you know, especially like at JFF, so much of the culture around there is, you know, people being like scared and people being, you know, forced into silence and actually not being allowed to be themselves and not feeling like they have a space. I mean, that's certainly how I felt at JFS anyway. And I think after that, you know, first initial step of, you know, actually being yourself, of trying to find a space, I think it all kind of flows quite easily. After you have those two things, you know, in mind, it's kind of an uphill, you know, like it's kind of clear trajectory almost.
Yeah, I'd say aside from all of these things, I guess like learn as much as you can from other queer and trans Jews. There's a rich history of queer and trans thought, balancing on the mechitzah, wrestling with God and men, a rainbow thread which has just been published in the US, so there are loads of books and articles and Facebook groups there that you can be uplifted by other people when you feel these spaces kind of dragging you down, and like, yeah, just surround yourself by these people because you are going to get fatigued at some point trying to come up against all this crap, and you just need to remember that you're not alone, and yeah, people like you have existed and are the backbone of Jewish spaces. Yeah, trans and queer Jews have always existed, and I'm blessed to be going to Spark Talmud camp this year, which I never thought would be possible when I entered Judaism. I was like, me studying Talmud like a year and a half after converting, ridiculous. But yeah, I'm going to study Talmud with queer and trans Jews, and you know, it's incredible that this exists in Jewish life. Yeah, do it.
And I'm just going to speak briefly to the school aspect of this. And I went to the opposite of JFS, which was a girls-only Church of England school. And I think what I would say to anyone who is trying out these new spaces or in a place where they don't have control over what the elements of the space are, is to ask why you're not comfortable. Not that it's on you that you're not comfortable, but trying to figure out what element of it maybe makes you uncomfortable. I spent every summer on a mixed camp, not knowing how to talk to boys, and the mechitzah was very comforting for me in that respect, in that I didn't have any exposure to boys, and so being in an all-girls space was very comfortable. And now that I have learned some social skills, it's nice to be in mixed spaces. So I think like every time you try that new space, you have to figure out, is it difficult because it's new? Is it difficult because it's really working for me and that acceptance and that freedom is too much for me and it's an exhilaration that I've not felt before? Or is it because it's not working for me? And having those questions in your arsenal to try and figure out what it is about spaces that are comfortable or are not comfortable is really an important tool that I definitely got a lot out of in my life. So on that note, I'm going to thank our panelists. Oh, sorry, just one.
Sorry, it's just because I didn't hear it being mentioned. There is a very, very good book called Balancing on mechitzah.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to hear more queer voices about mechitzah, that's a thing that exists. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's great. And please all share like ideas and resources with each other. That's exactly what communities like this are for. So we will give our panelists a round of applause, and Gabi will.
Yes, thank you all so much to our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for coming. And also thank you to Oli. So Oli and I co-founded and co-directed Gabi, and yeah, I want to say thank you for chairing the panel and also for doing this whole thing with me. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the conversation as well as attending and asking questions. Our next open event is going to be an art salon at JW3 called Letters to Our Matriarchs on Tuesday the 24th of September, we're still looking for artists who contribute to that. So if it's something that sparks a bit of interest in you, it could be visual art, written art, poetry, sound art, music, anything that you would consider under that bracket, let us know. If you want to take home our beautiful pronoun badges, we're asking for £1 to suggest a donation, otherwise pop them back in the pot. We want to thank all the amazing members and allies who donated to our recent fundraiser, and if you want to make a donation before you leave, let us know. We have it on Zettel, so we can take hard donations as well. And if you speak to Ree or AD at the back, well, thank you, they will take money from you.
Consensual.
If you want to know more about Laviot, you can go onto our website, and there you can also sign up to our newsletter. And if you want to have a chat with us, Oli, or I, or anyone, do. Even if you want to get involved in Laviot, have a chat to us. Otherwise, have a lovely rest of your Sunday.